Follow the lantern. Do not think of a museum with velvet ropes and glass cases. Think of a living street, where the past still breathes through doors that swing on wooden hinges and through paper windows that glow like warm rice milk. We are not here to judge from far away. We are here to stand inside another logic. What shocks us now was once routine. What sounds strange today once kept a community steady. Behind each ritual stood a need for calm. Behind each rule stood a way to keep people moving in step. The lantern leads down into cool soil first, because many ideas about life begin with ideas about death. A burial chamber opens like a ribcage of brick and timber. Clay figures sit in quiet ranks. A bronze chime rests against a lacquered box. There were centuries when the dead were not sent alone. The living sometimes went down to serve in the afterworld. That choice feels brutal through our modern lens, yet it seemed natural inside a world that believed the next realm mirrored this one. Over time, people shifted from bodies to symbols. Instead of living attendants, there were figurines. Instead of a real horse, there was a carved steed. A small change on the surface marked a vast change in thinking. Harm gave way to representation. The lantern catches a tiny pottery face with a half smile. It is enough to show that customs can bend without snapping the story that made them. Out of the earth, uncertainty follows us like a draft under a door. When a season was at stake, when a move of a capital was on the table, people asked the world to speak back. Beside a low fire, a shoulder blade from an ox and the belly of a turtle shell heat until fine cracks bloom. A diviner whispers. The crack climbs right or left. The answer is cast as luck or warning. This is oracle bone divination. For us, it sounds like superstition. For that time, it was consensus. If the sign came through a ritual everyone knew, then a bold choice felt safely framed. The lantern slides over inked characters that record the question and the result. Politics and fear, both fed and calmed by the same ritual act. We leave the fire and pass under a city gate. A board above the arch lists regulations and names, but one name is missing letters. The missing strokes are not a mistake. They are respect. The name taboo turned calligraphy into soft barrier and reminder. To avoid writing a sovereign's name in full was to step back one pace before power. The rule seems fussy now. Inside that world, it made distance visible and reduced friction. A brush that hesitates keeps a body from rushing where it should not go. The lantern lingers on a graceful character that has one corner left open, like a window that never shuts all the way. Courtesy can be quiet and strict at once. Crowds gather in the market square. The air smells of fried dough and ironwork. A man stands with a wooden yoke locked around his neck. It is heavy. He cannot lower his head to hide. This is the Kang. The punishment is public, on purpose. The point is not only pain. The point is memory. In our age, we cloak punishment to protect dignity. In their age, the square was a classroom. The Kang told a story on behalf of the law and the guild and the street. Over years, codes evolved. Harsh penalties fell away. But for long stretches, a block of wood and a space filled with eyes did the work of social control. Turn from the square into a courtyard where a family altar anchors the room. On the wall hangs a scroll of lineage. Inside certain eras, a grave mistake by one person could spill trouble onto relatives. Collective responsibility did not begin in cruelty. It began in the state, using the family to police itself. By attaching risk to the household, the authorities pushed watchfulness downward. It feels unfair to us. To them it was a net that kept the pond clear. The lantern shows the names, each written with care, bound by ink before being bound by law. In that room, kinship is not an idea. It is a contract. Corridors stretch toward a palace. Voices drop without being told. In these inner halls moved a class of people the outer city rarely met. They were the guards of privacy, the keepers of seals, the carriers of messages through rooms where lineage was sensitive and inheritance fierce. Eunuchs served because the court wanted hands that would not create dynasties of their own. Power collected around that design. Sometimes it protected, sometimes it corrupted. The design itself answered a practical question with a human tool. The lantern passes lacquered cabinets and quiet feet. The palace solved a delicate problem by changing the people allowed to stand nearest to it. Outside the palace walls, a different door opens. The threshold is narrow, and the room is barely wider than a wingspan. A desk takes up most of the floor. On it sit brushes, ink, and a pillow of steamed rice wrapped in leaves. A young scholar has tied his belt tighter to forget his stomach. He will be here for days. The civil service examinations offered the steadiest ladder a commoner could place against the wall of state. The price was time, and a mind drilled to perform under pressure. The eight-legged essay taught a rigid music of argument. It trained discipline, and also fenced the imagination. Yet, to whole families, it sounded like hope. The lantern rests on a page full of compact lines, each stroke placed as if it had weight. When order inside writing promised order inside government, society accepted a narrow door for a chance to pass through it. Across the lane, a row of robes waits on a beam. Cloth is law you can wear. Color marks rank. Silk marks status. The little beasts embroidered on square badges are not pets. They are announcements. Rank badges tell onlookers who stands where without anyone speaking. Today, clothes try to separate us by taste and mood. Then, clothing held the map of hierarchy. You did not need to ask which seat belonged to whom. The fabric told you. The lantern touches a crane with a thread of silver. It gleams like a polite warning. Beauty served both pride and protocol. A shopkeeper flips a thick book to a page that divides the year into lucky and unlucky light. Weddings wait for the right morning. Groundbreaking waits for a clean hour. Sailors stand down when the calendar frowns. Choosing auspicious time did more than soothe fear. It synchronized people. When a whole community turns the page together, they act together, which makes hard tasks feel safer. The lantern shows how a ritual can be a schedule, wearing incense. The lantern glides into the room where a family altar faces the door. An incense bowl sends up a thin ribbon of smoke. The faces glowing in that smoke belong to the living and the dead. Ancestor veneration is both consolation and policy. It fixes attention on duty. It repeats names so that promises stick. A child learns to bow and to listen. An elder repeats a story of a mistake and a repair. The altar is a constitution for the house. The law of the city can come and go. The law of the family waits on the shelf for morning and night. From the altar we step into a kitchen, where a mother teaches a daughter how to greet an aunt, where a grandmother teaches a granddaughter how to step through a doorway without planting a heel on the threshold. Social rules pressed harder on women than on men for long stretches. The pressure claimed that households would be steadier if women were quieter, stricter with themselves, more loyal to duty than to desire. Much of that code reads as inequality now. It was presented as glue then. Understanding it does not excuse its harm. It explains its roots. The lantern holds on the threshold for a breath. Respect can be graceful. It can also be a cage. Music drifts from a courtyard bright with red silk and the green of bamboo. Two families meet. Astrologers have compared birth dates. An aunt checks a trunk of gifts. A bride and a groom do not yet know if they like how the other sneezes or laughs. The match solves a need beyond two hearts. It links finances and honor between clans. In cities and schools, centuries later, personal choice begins to grow louder. Inside that earlier room, alliance came first, and affection was supposed to follow. The lantern watches hands touch for the first time, and then lift bowls as the elders set the pace for a life that is half private and half public. A narrow alley opens into a space that smells of licorice, dried peel, and roots scrubbed clean. Drawers line a wall like a library on its side. A physician takes a wrist and waits, measuring with fingers the rhythm beneath skin. Traditional prescriptions answered the philosophy of a balanced world. Some formulas we now judge risky. That does not mean the people who used them lacked thought. It means their map of the body matched their map of earth and heaven. Health was harmony. By that map, the best doctor was a keeper of balance. The lantern floats over scales that are barely heavier than a breath. Even skepticism can bow to the care with which a remedy was measured. On days when illness swept faster than a prayer, villagers built barricades and posted guards. Markets paused. Strangers turned back at the bridge. Quarantine by rope and sign is blunt. It was also one of the few tools available. The lantern touches a plank that once kept a road empty. The wood is scarred by sun and rain. Community often survives when it enforces plain rules that everyone can follow, with the strength they have. At noon, the lantern finds a rest station along a long road. Horses pant. A clerk stamps a sheet and hands back a tally pass. Couriers eat quickly. They trade for fresh animals and go. The courier station is a heartbeat that the state can place wherever it needs a pulse. It makes distance shorter without moving mountains. It also marks the reach of official eyes. Where the stamp appears, so does the state. The lantern watches a red circle dry on paper. Power travels on paper as well as on feet. Later, the lantern falls in step with a line of small shoes moving the length of a walkway. For centuries, in some circles, very small feet were praised as delicate and refined. The practice that produced them caused lasting pain and damage. Eventually, it was condemned and abandoned. Here, the lantern refuses to look away. Standards of beauty are not timeless. They are made and unmade by talk among neighbors and by the pressure of fashion and class. When ideas about dignity change, beauty changes too. Night leans in. A drum marks watches. Guards slide a bar across a gate. Curfews kept streets calm when lamps were few and roads narrow. The city becomes a giant clock with audible hours. Midnight is not a number. It is the third beat after the second beat. The lantern dimly follows a patrol and sees why rules about movement at night felt reasonable. A dark city without order is a dangerous ocean. On a lintel hang slips of paper printed with charms. A small bowl of ash sits on a stoop. Rituals of protection speak to the quiet part of the mind that needs to feel seen by something larger. You may doubt the mechanism. You cannot doubt the relief that follows. A soft practice can support hard lives. The lantern flickers in the draft and steadies again. Calm is a tool as real as a hammer. In a sitting room, a grandfather lifts a brush. Children crowd his knees. He writes a single character for longevity or peace and gifts it to a friend for a birthday. He pauses often because brushwork is breathwork. Calligraphy trains the eye to decide and the hand to commit. It disciplines posture and temper. A scroll on a wall is artwork. It is also a mirror that reminds the room to sit up straighter. The lantern reads the wet line as it darkens and dries. A house can reform itself by looking at a stroke and wanting to be like it. Step over the threshold with courtesy. Do not step on it. That small act separates outside from inside without a speech. It keeps the border intact. Rules that guard places are often silent. The floor remembers them. The lantern passes, and you can feel the habit settle into the ankle. People keep manners not only because they were told, but because the body learns emotion and stores it until it feels natural. Dawn returns, and a mist hangs over clay tiles. In a courtyard, a man moves through a slow set of forms that match his breathing. This is cultivation of health by patience. No gear, no shouting. Only repeated attention to the path of air in and out. A day that starts with balance often stays balanced longer. The lantern breathes along for a minute and discovers how quiet practice once stitched mornings to evenings with thread you could not see but could feel. Outside a tea stall, someone rehearses patterns of argument for a test. You can hear the skeleton of the 8-legged essay in the cadence. Meanwhile, a barber trims a style that was once demanded by decree. A haircut becomes a signature for loyalty. Politics grows hair and shaves it. The lantern sees how ordinary objects become emblems when a government pushes on them. The river is already awake. Boats clack against each other. Poles thump mud. Trade is the river's dialect. Salt, rice, bolts of cloth, bundles of tea leaves. A child runs with a strip of paper that once wrapped a lantern. A trader tucks away a light sheet that says a bank in another town will honor his claim. Paper money is a clever promise made portable. The lantern skims across the surface and shows that trust can float. When distance is tamed by trust, markets grow from village to province, and then to regions, talking to one another like old friends. Smells change near the city gate. Waste workers load carts with what the city does not want. They do not throw it away. They steer it toward fields that will harvest with its help. It offends our taste. It supported their soil. The loop from home to farm and back kept nutrients moving and kept hunger at bay. The lantern points out that disgust and wisdom sometimes share a road and never speak. Street fronts glow with hand-painted signs. A crane for a cloth shop. A deer for a pharmacy. A pair of scales for a pawn office. Lanterns hung at doors are both light and billboard. A stranger can read a neighborhood by symbols long before he can read its script. The city is a dictionary where every entry is a door. In a hall lined with benches, members of a craft look after their own. A guild sets prices so people do not cut each other to pieces. It pays small stipends when a carpenter breaks a wrist. It apprentices the young so skill does not scatter. In a village meeting, an elder reads a village covenant that says who cleans which ditch and who can graze which slope. These local compacts are how a big country stays human-sized. The lantern nods to rules that work because the people who follow them wrote them. Numbers and symbols whisper meaning at holidays. A pair of fish means abundance. A bat means good fortune, because the word sounds the same. Even gifts obey grammar. The month of a wedding leans towards certain dates and not others. Before a wedding, the families may ask a priest to compare the calendars of the couple for harmony. If it smiles, they breathe easier. If it frowns, they choose a lucky day to even the ground. You may not believe the math. You can believe in the relief that certainty gives to the anxious. A procession in white passes. Rain begins. Hired mourners wail a pattern, and the pattern gives permission for the rest to cry. Grief likes a container. Without one, it spills and burns. With one, it can be set down for an hour so a family can sleep. The incense bowl on the table glows under a tent of palms. The lantern bows, because the old know something we forget. Ceremony is medicine for feelings, not theories. We walk again beside water, this time along a stone embankment high as a house. Men carry baskets of dirt. They sing to keep the pace. Flood is an enemy you fight with patience. Canals and embankments look boring until the day they are the last wall between a harvest and hunger. The lantern runs a hand over granite that has felt 100 springs. Ordinary labor held whole provinces together. Sometimes boats sat idle, despite fair wind. A sea ban would close harbors for security and control. It frustrated merchants. It comforted officials, charged with watching the horizon for danger. The rule opened and closed like a valve when pressure rose and fell. The lantern does not take sides. It shows the hinge and lets us see the fear that weight turns on. A warehouse stores salt bricks. A forge stacks bars of iron like loaves. Salt and iron matter to dinner and to tools. They matter to soldiers and to taxes. The state often kept them close, because whoever controls them controls much else. A stamp on a load of salt is a small dot that marks a line running from a mine to a field to an office to a pay chest where coins knock like small bells. The lantern listens. Finance can be as physical as a shovel. In kitchens near the fields, the menu leans away from beef, not by taste alone, but by arithmetic. Oxen pull plows. Meat is one meal. Muscle is 1,000 furrows. So families chose muscle. Choices like that, multiplied by counties and years, shape cuisine. The lantern turns toward a pot where a stew of beans and greens works all afternoon. It feeds many. It costs little. It protects the animal that protects the farm. Time itself had texture. Before metal clocks ticked in pockets, time burned and dripped. Incense clocks counted by scent. Clepsydras counted by water. A house could tell how long a visit lasted by how far the ash had crawled. The lantern laughs softly. You can tell a lot about a people by how they measure what they cannot hold. Paintings of mountains with mist like cotton breath hang next to poems carved into fans. A single stroke suggests a ridge. An empty space suggests air. The shorter the poem, the longer it stays. Arts like these taught people to stand still, to let their minds wash clean, to appreciate what is not filled in. The lantern becomes a brush for a moment and stops just before excess, because stopping is part of the work. The day we have walked through is stitched from practice. Some practices we admire on sight. Some we reject without hesitation. Many we understand, only after we stand inside their rooms for a while. When we step back and try to name what we have seen, the word order tries to grab every sentence. Do not let a single word own this world. Call it habit where habit applies. Call it covenant where a village writes rules for itself. Call it courtesy when a gesture carries peace. Call it bureaucracy when a stamp outruns a conversation. Call it beauty when a thread finds perfect tension. Language should fit the thing, not the other way around. Why did these ways fade or change? Because circumstances shifted. Trade stretched farther, science changed medicine, printing changed education. Ideas about the person grew more protective of dignity. Some customs were dropped because they hurt. Some were remade into symbols that do not wound. Some were kept as performances in festivals, as gallery displays, as subjects in classrooms. When a society grows, its rules are supposed to grow with it. That is not a betrayal of ancestors. It is exactly what careful ancestors would have done, given new facts. Were the old ways wrong? The question is too small. They were what people could build with the tools of the time. Right and wrong weave together in the story of any age. Our job is not to scold on every page. Our job is to learn. Learn why a figurine is kinder than a slave in a tomb. Learn why an open calendar works better than a curse. Learn why a test is useless if it cannot tell a creative mind from a careful parrot. Learn why beauty that costs pain is a beauty we can live without. The lantern nods. Lessons are what keep a tradition alive after a custom dies. There is one more picture to carry home. Imagine you walk out through the last gate. The night air is cool. Your hand holds the lantern handle and it warms your palm. You pour water into a small pot and set a pinch of tea. You watch steam rise and curl like a character you have not learned yet. You glance at a family photo on the wall. You step over your own threshold without thinking, because the body has learned respect. You tell a child one short story your grandparents told you. You put down today's worry for the length of that story. This is how the past stays. Not in marble, but in the weight of little acts. Now set the lantern beside the door. The light still lives along the brass of the knob and in the grain of the wood. You understand a little better why the people before you chose what they chose. And you understand why you will choose differently when kindness asks it of you. A small light is enough. It shows what is behind and what is ahead. It is not blinding, it is steady. It is yours to carry, and it is old enough to know the way.